if you had to give people drafting on DraftKings for the first time this year, or who are feeling a bit rusty and need that kind of refresher, what's like the top piece of advice you would give to them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and this is I don't mean this as a cop out, but if you've played any form of fantasy football at all, like even your season-long home leagues, or if you've dabbled in the best ball spaces, you've played on underdogs, played on drafters or FFPC, or used to play MFL 10s, right? You've played all of this different stuff. One of the big things that I do constantly try to tell people, it's like DraftKings Best Ball is so different, and not like from a scoring or like how they set up their, right? They don't do anything crazy. They use their traditional DFS scoring, so that's a little different, but it's at the end of the day, Puka Nacua was really valuable on every site. Kyron Williams was really valuable on every site. The hits are the hits. There are minor differences we can do on DraftKings, again, around some of their scoring, the fact it's 20 rounds and all of that. But the most important thing, 100% to me, is these drafts can be very much like the Wild West. And you are going to get more fluctuation in where players get drafted, how your opponents construct teams, just basic things that we probably take for granted in terms of stacking and, when to take certain players depending upon, right? If I take Christian McCaffrey, now what do I do with my running backs later? Our opponents on DraftKings, generally speaking, are not thinking about a lot of these things. They are going and getting their guys. They don't, you're going to see 4 and 5 quarterback teams and 4 and 5 tight end teams. And you're going to see guys start with 6 running backs in a row, which, if you played best ball a bunch, and no offense to the running back folks, it can be tough to build a good team that way. And so I just try to be really, the biggest thing that I do in DraftKings is really try to be cognizant of kind of reading each room and treating each room that I'm in very, very differently. And so, because sometimes you're going to get values that you would never get in another draft. And it could be because maybe the people in that room just don't like that player, or because 4 guys in your room have 3 quarterbacks through 5 rounds, and it's like, you got to be willing to adapt within those rooms. And then specifically, I mentioned the quarterback thing. I think being very cognizant of things like your quarterbacks, we talk about on underdog, getting locked out, if you will, of wide receiver. It can happen a lot because underdog people love their wide receivers. DraftKings people love their quarterbacks. So you can and they don't get, you took Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. If that guy wants Tua, he's going to take Tua. It doesn't matter. And so being very cognizant of those little things, and being willing to be like, in a different draft or in your home league, you may say, I can push, I can try to be a little bit risky, say with a quarterback. If he's your guy and you set up your team to take that player, I think DraftKings is a little bit of a different ground in terms of just some little micro things like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to kind of piggyback off that in a second. But first, if it's the first time you found us on the Fantasy Sanctuary, hit that subscribe button. We are 65 subscribers away from 2,000. Been a big off season, and it's only going to get bigger. Best ball streams, underdog every Monday, DraftKings every Wednesday, all the way up until kickoff. So the point, like I kind of stress to people when we talk about DraftKings, is I don't think wide receiver is, it doesn't dry up quite as fast as it does on underdog. But for me, I still kind of focus a lot on the wide receiver position. You go back to last year, there were 72 running backs who had 100-yard games. And on DraftKings, that's going to get you the 3-point bonus. There were 162 wide receivers who had 100-yard games. And you think about it, it's like, okay, well, in the NFL, there are more wide receivers on the field. So there's more chance that they are going to get to that. We also start more wide receivers on DraftKings than we do running backs. You can start up to 4 wide receivers in a lineup when you include your flex, because you start 3 plus the flex. But you're never going to get to more than 3 running backs. So, yeah, I always want to leave a draft with at least 8 wide receivers, even if I've started with 5 in the first 5 picks. Look back at the teams that did well in last year's final. 71% of the teams who were actually in last year's DK final had at least 8 wide receivers. At least 40% of the teams had an 8 wide receiver build. So yeah, everybody goes crazy on underdog and the wide receivers disappear really quickly. But I think as long as you're cognizant of the wide receivers on DraftKings, you can build differently. I mean, in 2022, the teams that made the final, 7% of them were robust RB builds, which is something which, you and me, we do that for a laugh. We do that to try and be different, to do something. But the key thing for those robust RB teams, all 7% of those teams that were in the 1,000-person final that year, they all still had 5 wide receivers before they got to round 10. So I think it's as long as you're cognizant of the fact that you're going to have to start 3, possibly 4 of these every week, there's still going to be room for you to build differently. That's kind of the one that I would hit on. Do you find yourself still building heavily through wide receivers in these DraftKings rooms and leaning into those 0 RB builds, or are you a bit more flexible here than underdog?
So yes to both, actually. I'm definitely going to be more open to taking what we would call a detour, right? Basically away from the wide receiver position. I think at the end of the day, no matter what site you're playing, no matter really what form of fantasy that you're playing, I guess Superflex could be a little bit different. But the basis of your team is actually, we used to think about it because we named all these strategies around running back, but really what they are is around the wide receiver position, because it is the position that has the least potential to find, not even just from a season long perspective, it's definitely from a season long perspective, but from even like an individual week perspective. You mentioned the 100-yard games, or what, where I come from, not just 100-yard games, but spike weeks, right? Big performances relative to the position in any given week. It is so much harder to find those later in the draft at wide receiver. Outliers exist. That's how the world works. Puka Nacua and Tank Dell happen, right? Justin Jefferson many moons ago goes late in drafts, and it does happen. But generally speaking, you're not going to find a lot of those guys. And so maybe even on that team, you get one, right? That's still only one spot that Puka Nacua was able to fill in your starting lineup. And like you said, you need 4. You need 3 wide receivers and a flex. The scoring is also such that it is better. Again, you outlined the 100-yard thing. That's like one way to summarize how much more powerful wide receivers can be. And generally, that, what'd you say, 162 100-yard games from wide receivers are going to come from the best wide receivers. Like Van Jefferson is not going into that number, right? Like, no offense to, I don't even hate Jacoby Myers, but like the Jacoby Myers and the Van Jeffersons and the Devontae Parkers and stuff, they don't fit that number. But a lot of the times drafters will default to those guys to be like, well, I'm just going to draft 10 wide receivers, and if I fill it with Devontae Parker and stuff, he'll get me there. But what you really need is the big games. And from a wide receiver perspective, they generally come from the best wide receivers in the league. Sometimes the best wide receivers are Puka Nacua, who go later. But that is a very, very rare thing. Where at running back, Kyren Williams, also an outlier, but we get many more of those. And they specifically can happen in really small time pockets, which are also valuable in best ball, right? Starting running back goes down. I always like to use Zeke when he's back on the Cowboys now, but Zeke when he was on the Cowboys with Tony Pollard behind him, it was like, Tony Pollard might get me a score that's okay when Zeke is there. He scores a touchdown or something. But when Zeke is out, Tony Pollard is a top 5 running back in all of fantasy. And so even if it's only for a game, right? If it's in week 17, last year, Raheem Mostert is out in week 17. So Achane is now a top 5 running back in fantasy, and he basically produced as such in week 17. The power of that in best ball, even if it's small time pockets or one game from the running back position, I can get those huge games from even running backs like that we don't love, right? Gus Edwards had one. Nobody loves Gus Edwards, but when you get all the work and you're the lead back for even 1 week in an offense at the running back position, you can have those. So it's kind of blending together all of those different things to where I still want to win the wide receiver position on DraftKings, and that in turn will help me win the flex position. And then look, if the running back hits my flex because I got 3 that scored 30, awesome. Like that I can still benefit from that. But generally speaking, I want to win it with these high-powered wide receivers. And so that's kind of the focus of every single draft, even though I know I can take a little bit, look, if there's a running back that you really, really love and he falls in the 4th round or the 3rd round, by all means, you can do that on DraftKings more easily than the other sites. But I still want to just keep the core of my wide receivers are going to win this thing for me, both because of the scoring, because I got 20 rounds, so maybe I got more, and because the market has gotten smarter on the best guys are at the top.
Yeah, and I think like when you've played a lot of DFS, you become very much like aware of the three square, we call it, when a running back becomes available because of the injuries ahead of them, and they're priced up at like 4,400 on DraftKings, and everybody plays them, and the whole week is spent debating. Is it bad chalk? Is it good chalk? They're gonna get 20 touches and all that. And yeah, if you can take that mindset to some of your picks and say, okay, if this player is the RB1 that week? Are they capable of 20 touches? And if so, that's all I really need to know. They're a good pick. They'll be fine for 1 week.